Good morning, everybody. We've been dealing quite a bit lately with what are called convertible notes. Sounds fancy and technical, and in some ways it is, but at essence, it's actually quite a simple document. What it is an option for parties whereby an investor invests in a company and they have the option after, say, 2 years or 4 years or 5 years, the investor has the option to either call up the investment as a loan and have the principal and interest repaid, or to convert that investment into shares in the company. There are, however, convertible notes and convertible notes. The term convertible note is, of course, just a handle to describe the bundle of contractual rights and obligations and liabilities in a contractual document. So, in terms of explaining some of those fishhooks, we've been dealing with a situation recently where there was a convertible note with a personal guarantee on behalf of the directors of the issuing company, and also an unfettered, which means unqualified, right for the note holder to be able to convert to equity before the company could repay. So that arguably was a little bit skewed in favour of the note holder, in the sense that they had the directors of the company who had, my client who has considerable assets, on the hook shall things go awry, but also have the ability to convert to equity in a way that without any right of reply, so to speak, to the issuing company, which is not an issue. I mean, of course, it depends completely on the relative bargaining power and commercial strength of the parties. If it's a startup, it was just desperate for cash, as most of these startups are, it could be in a position and you didn't have any alternative investors. You could be in a situation where you have to take that convertible note, but beware. I mean, so much turns on the conversion formula and some of the other provisions around how that is calculated, and the timing of that at the conversion date or the repayment date being obviously the same date, where that option actually comes up to for the parties to decide what is to happen with the investment. So, you really need to be careful if you are the issuer of the convertible note. You need to be careful that the formula is correct and reflects the enormous amount of time and energy and what they call sweat equity that is put into a startup venture. It may not look on the books like fantastic progress has been made at the conversion date / repayment date, but as people watching this that have had startups or have read widely about startups will know, sometimes the book value, the value on paper of these startups isn't properly reflected, or fairly reflected is probably a better way to put it, in the actual the actual valuation of the business, because once that critical tipping point is reached in the startup's lifespan, the attractiveness to investors to purchase at an enormous multiple of the current turnover can be reached, and that's why these relatively nascent startups can be sold after 1, 2, or 3 or 4 years for millions or billions, dare I say, of dollars, because these investors can see that the startup has reached that critical tipping point where with their resources and their networks, they could scale it into an incredibly valuable company. So, in that context, if you are issuing the convertible note, you need to be aware that the note holder could, take a lot, if not nearly all, of your company at the conversion date, which obviously wasn't what was intended, or certainly not what you would have hoped for as the issuer when you entered into those negotiations. So get a good lawyer, get a good accountant, and really work through the itsy bitsy detail of the provisions of that document to ensure that you're not caught with your pants down after 2 or 3 or 4 years when the note matures. Just quickly speaking from the perspective of the note holder, because we've just given you some of the things to look out for the issuer. For the note holder, obviously personal guarantee is far preferable to have, particularly if the directors have, or the people behind, they may not be directors, the startup have assets. Of course, it's preferable. Do be aware, however, that having recourse to those assets can be challenging, lengthy court process, and it could potentially take quite a long time. So your investment from that perspective is not perhaps as accessible in a liquid sense as you may hope. The other thing is, make sure, and I probably should have started with this, but it's early in the morning and I've only had one coffee so far. Make sure that the PG is actually worth the paper it's written on. Make sure these people actually have assets. Make sure they have them in the jurisdiction you're trying to enforce the agreement. It's no good to have it if they're wealthy overseas investors and they have no assets in New Zealand and the jurisdiction of the agreements in New Zealand. You get into a whole world of pain in terms of trying to enforce that over and locate and recover from those assets overseas if it's indeed possible at all. So that's another thing to look out for. Also, in terms of from the perspective of the note holder, you need to make sure that there are some controls over the company in the period. If you think that these people aren't experienced business people and you think that potentially they're very clever and they're, for example, a great software developer as opposed to a great business person, do you have any input in how the company is run? Because generally convertible notes don't have any controls of that nature, because your interest in the share capital and any contractual arrangements won't exist because you're not a shareholder per se. So if you did want to have some sort of input into how your investment is managed or how the company conducts itself, perhaps you would need a separate contractual agreement with the company along those lines, or some sort of optionality to, one of the ones we have acted on lately, there's an optionality to join a requirement on the existing shareholders to negotiate a shareholders agreement as soon as any part of the loan was converted into equity, so like a pre-conversion, which was an interesting concept to advise on and to counsel our client on what the effects of that may be. But yeah, as the note holder, you in some situations would want that control, and it would be naive to think you have any of that control if you don't have it contractually, because you're only really going to be relying on it if you're in a situation where you think that the directors and shareholders of the startup, the founders, don't have a good handle on what should be done the way you see it to actually manage your investment and bring it to fruition. So there's a whole myriad of reasonably complex considerations. It's a bit of a jigsaw puzzle, and make sure you get proper advice if you're going to enter into a convertible note as either an issuer or a holder. Thanks very much. I hope you enjoyed that video.